Welcome back to another episode of Not Financial Advice. My name is Sean. Today is Tuesday, February 6th, 2024. And, a few things had brought about my desire to make this video. It is 2024, and looking at the 21st century, I think back to the beginning of the 20th century. And so by 1935, within the first 35 years of last century, we had a global pandemic, a world war, and a Great Depression. And it's often said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so here, 24 years into the 21st century, we've had a global pandemic, and it could be argued that there are many things that we are overdue for. And so that thought, along with recent news developments and conversations had with loved ones, has inspired me to make this video about the best investments in a period of global turmoil and conflict. I hope to bring you a lot of value and information in this video today. So we're going to get started and jump into this topic right after this.
You need to diversify your bonds.
The only problem you're going to have is that you didn't buy more. Because by the time you read about it in the Wall Street Journal, it's already too late.
Okay, before we jump into the topic of today's video, let's take a look at the old portfolio here. It looks like the S&P 500 is flat, and my portfolio is up 0.2%. Good for about $17 in gains. Everything's pretty flat overall. It looks like the small cap index is outperforming today. My top 5 gainers and bottom 5 decliners are going to be Mexican Coke up 3%, Scott's Miracle Grow up 2.5%, up 2.3% is Cummins. Starbucks is up 2%, and Tesla is also up 2%. I'll ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let's get down here and take a look at the bottom 5 decliners. So Vertex Pharmaceuticals is down 2.1%. Service Corp International is up 2%, down 2% rather. Down 1.9% is Estee Lauder. Down 1.45% is Kroger, and down 1.4% is Green Thumb Industries. And so just diving right into the topic of today's video, I want to play a video that I saw. I want to play a video that I saw a few days ago that really got this thought process started here. So let's watch this together.
Tonight, the FBI director sounding the alarm about Chinese efforts to attack American power grids, transportation systems, and communications networks.
China's hackers are positioning on American infrastructure in preparation to wreak havoc and cause real-world harm to American citizens and communities.
And Christopher Wray announcing a major takedown of a Chinese hacking operation on American soil, dubbed Volt Typhoon.
Working with our partners, the FBI ran a court-authorized on-network operation to shut down Volt Typhoon and the access it enabled. Steps China was taking, in other words, to find and prepare to destroy or degrade the civilian critical infrastructure that keeps us safe and prosperous.
Wray and other officials say China poses the world's greatest cyber threat, and they warn that Americans remain vulnerable. U.S. Cybersecurity Chief Jen Easterly describing the devastating impact of a potential massive Chinese cyber attack.
Telecommunications going down so people can't use their cell phone. People start getting sick from polluted water. Trains get derailed. Air traffic control system, port control systems are malfunctioning. This is truly an everything, everywhere, all at once scenario.
Easterly said China believes that sort of cyber attack would crush any American will to defend Taiwan from a Chinese invasion. In a statement to NBC News, a Chinese government spokesman denied China hacks into foreign networks, calling it...
Wow. So, all right, there we go. So the question is, I guess since 2020, in the last 4 years, we've seen COVID that's come out of China. There's been a highlight on the harms that fentanyl originating in China is doing in the United States. And there we just heard some really chilling testimony about the threat that Chinese hackers could pose on American infrastructure as it might pertain to our will to defend Taiwan. And so the question is, what's the best way to be positioned in the event of a world war or global crisis? And so the first thing that we're doing here is just looking at like a 150-year chart of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And I guess the first thing that I want to draw everyone's attention to is the way that stocks have broadly performed during times of crisis. So if we take a look here, we can see on the bottom of the screen. Here on the bottom of the screen, we had World War I starting somewhere around here, and we had World War I ending somewhere around here. And so markets, for the most part, were flat to up. But that is a trend that continues throughout time. So if we also look here, right around 1940-ish, we can see that by 1944, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was again up. Looking at the Korean War right around 1951 and then going to 1953, we saw that the market, in fact, rose higher. Looking at Vietnam from about 1965 to about 1973, we can see that the market was essentially flat, depending on where you start or end this comparison. This was a conflict where markets did not do as well, um, but nothing as catastrophic as one might think. Looking at the Gulf War from 90 to about 91, 92, we can see that the market was higher. And then looking towards the global war on terrorism, we can see that the markets from about 2000 to say about 2007, 8 were notably higher. And so the first thing to understand about being invested for a time of global instability is, in fact, to remain invested. But what other things do we have going on that can inform our investment decisions? Um, the message of this video certainly is not be afraid of things that are going to happen and sell stocks.
Hey Don, no, it's not explosions. There's been an air raid siren just suddenly. Oh, here it is. There you are. That's an air raid siren. Several of them going off here in the center of.
So peace in Europe shattered as Russia invades Ukraine. That was in early 2022, about 2 years ago. Then later on,
above the U.S. in exclusive reporting from NBC News. The Chinese spy balloon that traveled across the country for several days was able to gather intelligence passing over sensitive American military sites before it was shot down in February on President Biden's order. That's according to 2 current and 1 former senior official. Among the new findings, China steered the balloon in a figure-8 pattern at times and collected electronic signals detected from U.S. bases and weapon systems. The balloon had a remote self-destruct mechanism.
So there about a year ago in April of 2023. But then again, we also see October 7th of 2023. We are in a war. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declares an attack on Israel by Hamas.
Armed with assault rifles inside of Israeli towns and cities, targeting civilians and fighting running gun battles against Israeli security forces. Hamas, the Palestinian militant group which controls Gaza, says it has taken Israelis hostage and it is bringing them inside of the Gaza Strip. Now, I just spoke to an Israeli security official. He says the correct term for what is going on right now is an invasion. He says at minimum there are hundreds of Palestinian gunmen involved in this assault.
Horrible, horrible things. And then as we can see here, more recently, this story, beginning of 2024, late 2023, if I'm not mistaken on the timeline here, basically the way in which Ukrainian citizens rose up to defend their country. We have Taiwanese citizens who are taking first aid training.
What we're going to do today is combat rifle training. We are taking the warm-ups now, and it's what we call the double tap. So it means 2 shots. It's really important because you have to be sure the guy is down. We're talking about the Red Army. That's to be precise. Oh, anyone else is endangering the civil rights.
Yeah, so things don't look super great. And we can see that continued on here with this headline. Why is Mark Zuckerberg building a private apocalypse bunker in Hawaii? So, besides the US federal government, who has more information to open source intelligence or sentiment or communications than Mark Zuckerberg? What does he know that we don't know? So, not to be super conspiratorial, but I think all the things that are laid out here in plain English from valid news sources give people a right to be concerned. So, what I've done here is I did a little bit of scholarly research on Benzinga as well as the CFA Institute. And the question is how to invest during times of war. And so, what we can see here is a few fold. So, first and foremost, what we can see is that during World War I and World War II, all financial assets had lower returns. In terms of a real return, bonds were negative during World War I and World War II, and highlighted there in red. Stocks were positive during World War I and World War II, but to a much lower magnitude than during peacetime, before, during, and after those time periods. So it seems as if equities return, but not as strongly as they would during peacetime. And then looking at some more reliable data, we're also including Korea and Vietnam, where we see a similar pattern. And so we can have that understanding then that in wartime stocks do return positively, but just not to that same magnitude as they would in peacetime. And so the question is, what causes that level of wartime underperformance? And the answer from Benzinga is mostly higher inflation. And so we can just see the consumer price index. And so, measures of inflation are simply higher from World War I to Vietnam um, than in peacetime. And so, this just goes on to cover the right type of investments for Americans or for observers of war. But this article touches on something that was unique and hard to find around the whole internet. And so I'd like to actually highlight that. If you're watching this video in the United States, the most likely worst case scenario is you would be an observer of an escalating global conflict. But if you're watching this video in Central Europe or anywhere in Asia, it's scary to think about. But there are some notes left here about ways to invest during times of war as a participant. And I thought this was it's not really the main focus of this channel, these sort of doom and gloom things, but I found this to be interesting. And so it reads, if you find yourself in a country that's undergoing an active war, realizing that wealth preservation, it'll be low on your priority list. Finding food, clean drinking water, keeping you and your loved ones safe will outweigh everything else. But some of the things that are shown here to be important is asset portability. And so that would be things like gold coins, stacks of $100 US currency probably wouldn't hurt. They also mentioned some other things like cryptocurrency and a cold wallet. If you have to flee from one area to the next, precious metal, US currency, obviously those necessary things like food and water, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's even something mentioned such as, if you live in Eastern Europe, it might be a good idea to have a cabin in the woods, which is just like a horror movie, a lot like these last 4 years have been, frankly. But then other things are discussed, such as having a foreign bank account and things of that nature. And so, very scary. Not going to harp on that. I'll ask you to like and subscribe on this super depressing video, but I think it's an important one. So let's get back over here to an article I found on the CFA Institute. And what we can see here is that they have basically made the determination that the financial data is not super reliable. And so what they've done is an analysis of World War II. And so what we can see here are the top stocks or sectors and subsectors that performed during World War II. Now, over that 4 or 5 year period, essentially all stocks went higher, but to a lower magnitude than during peacetime. And this is what I found to be super duper interesting. And so the best performing sub asset class in World War II was printing and publishing. Printing and publishing, as you can see here, which I'm not able to highlight. So I think what that says to me is that people want to be aware of what's going on. They want to follow the news. And so it was newspapers and magazines in World War II. What stands in for newspapers and magazines? Frankly, I think it would be technology stocks. It would be Google search and YouTube. It would be Facebook. It would be Twitter. It would be television to a lesser extent and streaming to a larger extent, but it would be social media based. People are going to want to know exactly what's going on. And then there'd be advertising that occurs on there. And the thing that people seem to really enjoy during these war periods was beer and liquor, returning a huge amount during World War II. And so I think that, that could be the same as history doesn't repeat, but often rhymes. And so I'd look, not only at the broader US market, which is going to encapsulate those technology stocks that have supplanted newspapers and magazines, but I'd also look towards not only consumer defensive, be it stocks or ETFs, but also potentially cannabis companies. I think that in a time of accelerating uneasiness and crazy times, people would be looking to take the edge off, as it were. But then you also have personal services. Um, Frankly, I would look at funeral homes. Funeral homes and healthcare, I think, would be an area that I would look at. But going on down the list, there's things that are just a little bit harder to put a finger on. But the fourth best returning sub asset class is entertainment, which just shows me that you'd want to have exposure to the total United States stock market, including some of those technology and communication names. A lot of the places where people would be seeking out news sources would also be the same places that they'd be seeking out entertainment, be it streaming or be it social media. So on and so forth. And interestingly, there were some different subsectors that didn't do as well. And so consumer goods overall, they did return positively, but to a lower magnitude than others. Let's actually just take a look at some of the worst performers here. So communications, so telephones in World War II, that'd be telephones and switchboards and um, telegrams, things of that nature didn't do well. I think that'd be a little bit different due to the way technology is today. But you can see that tobacco actually returned really poorly, which is strange considering how well alcohol did. But that really takes us, to some of the best types of assets to be exposed to in World War I, be you a participant or an observer. And I think I'm going to just lay out here some of my top picks based on everything that we saw. So I'll ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'm just going to pull that up. So first and foremost, we have the total United States stock market index, not only because they're going to contain those names that are relied on for getting news and entertainment, which was a big driver of top line returns during World War II. But also because that has that small cap exposure. And we can see in wartime, the government does a lot of spending. Um, which is kind of confusing, but it leads to higher inflation. Um, and ultimately, that'll cause an increase in interest rates again. And then once those rates are cut, small caps tend to outperform. So it's a little bit confusing, but I hope that makes sense. As we saw in that headline, from the intelligence and law enforcement folks who just testified in front of Congress about the threat from hacking. You have consumer staples. I think that's sort of a no-brainer. That's going to include not only tobacco but also alcohol and food. And so I think this is a defensive stock that would be, have really good performance relative in 2024 and beyond. But also looking at healthcare, I think this would be one that would make sense to me to look at during those times. and then, sort of playing on how people, sort of dealt with their troubles, dealt with their stress levels, and used a lot of alcohol in World War II. I think that the cannabis sector, I think, would have a really strong return in a prospective Third World War. And then lastly, looking at that threat that we had, they mentioned in that congressional testimony from cyber attacks. I was thinking about including TAP or Coors beer because that was a really strong performer. Alcoholic beverages in World War II, yet they've been the subject and the victim of cyber attacks in the past. A lot of different companies have been the victim of cyber attacks in the past. And so thinking about this, I think, one of my top picks for global conflict would actually be Kroger Company. In the United States, they're the, I believe, second largest, if not largest, purveyor of grocery stores in the United States. I could see Walmart being attacked by foreign adversaries, but Kroger is a little bit more decentralized. They have Kroger stores in Ohio and Pennsylvania, but they also own around a dozen to 20 different grocery store chains that have their own management and their own regional logistics to an extent. And so I think Kroger grocery store would be one that that could be pretty defensive and have growth during that time period. So these are just some of my thoughts and feelings on a scary and sad subject, but I hope that you got value from this video. If you did, I'll ask you to like it, subscribe to the channel. As always, if there's a stock or an ETF you'd like for me to review, just leave that ticker symbol in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.